Welcome to the 8th in a series of interviews with candidates to replace Representative Niki Tsongas in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm Peggy Wardjolin, a member of Concord Citizens Protecting Progress. Today we welcome Lori Trahan, Lowell native, Westford resident, and most recently CEO of Consire Leadership Institute. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Most of the questions will be about your knowledge and philosophy of government, as well as your strategies for making decisions. We'll end with a lightning round asking you to quickly comment about issues important to our members. Let's start with a 2-minute biography. What would you like voters to know about you?
Oh, great. So I grew up in Lowell. My dad was a union iron worker. He was son of Portuguese immigrants. My mom was actually spent most of her childhood in an orphanage, and she was a domestic worker while raising my 3 sisters and me. So, I went to public schools. I started working at age 11, and we were very much a family that, lived paycheck to paycheck. That's at the heart of why I'm running. It's to go down and be a voice for families like the one I grew up in, families that rely on good-paying jobs, access to good quality public education, affordable college education, and health care that doesn't break the bank, and prescription drugs they can afford. I mean, those are the basics, and that's what keeps, social mobility and economic opportunity robust in our country. I had the opportunity to go to Georgetown on a scholarship, and after that I went to Capitol Hill. I had the privilege of working for Congressman Marty Meehan for nearly 10 years, both in Washington and up here in the district. I became his chief of staff, and so I know a lot of the legislative processes and the tools. We passed campaign finance reform, which took several years to pass, and a lot of negotiation and bipartisan effort. Most recently, I've been in the private sector for 15 years, first as the only woman executive at a high-tech company in Cambridge. So I really do know what it means, that fight for equal pay and equal work, and so many others. I started a company with 2 other women from Harvard Business School 6 years ago. And we've been focused mostly on getting more women into leadership roles in companies across the country and on corporate boards. So, it's hard to avert your eyes when you still look at the Congress and see 19% women, and how we need to be at the table for so many of the issues that are confronting the country today.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. The first group of questions asks about your opinions about the federal government. What types of programs should the federal government be responsible for?
Well, those are good questions. Yeah, so at the heart, look, the federal government has a major role of protecting us, protecting our national security, and making sure that, we are safe. But I think we're probably overcompensated right now in that area. We have plenty more to do in terms of, enforcing our laws and how we're going to do that while maintaining the values of our country. And but I think where the government really needs to improve its investment, safeguard its investment, is programs like Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. Those are programs that have worked for decades. So many people rely on those programs for their economic security into retirement and for basic health care. Certainly we have more to do as a government, as a federal government, to create jobs, hard hat jobs for one, with an infrastructure bill. I think that's an easy lever for our government to pull on. Not only revitalizes our cities and towns and repairs our bridges and roads, but it does create jobs in this district and all over the country. I talk a lot about education on the campaign trail, and we have to do more. We have to invest more in early education, certainly K through 12, but more pathways, alternative pathways, not just affordable college education, but reinvesting in trades and technical programs, community college programs that get our young people into jobs and into the workforce faster. Yeah.
Sure. Describe one program run by the federal government you feel is especially successful and effective, and explain why you think that is so.
Well, there are. I think when I started the answer to the last question, Medicare works, and if anything, it should be a model for us going forward. When I think about health care and the fact that it's a right that we have to provide to everybody in this country, I think about the success of Medicare. My parents are on Medicare, and it works really well. I hope I'm part of the design team for Medicare for All. There is a huge movement in providing that system so that everyone benefits. And we want to make sure that we have a good design so that we're not making unnecessary trade-offs on access or quality. So I really hope that I get to go to Washington and be part of that team. But look, in the near term, we could actually extend Medicaid. We could have Medicaid for more, a public option in the framework of ACA, so that we can, get that benefit to the people who need it most immediately. So I look at that as very much a short-term goal, because I do think Medicare for All might take a little bit more time in triaging the issues that so many families and seniors are confronting right now, is what I hope to do in November.
Now describe a federal program you feel is not successful. What improvements would you suggest?
Oh, gosh, federal program. So when you say program, there are so many things I find unsuccessful right now. You just sort of look across the cabinet, and it could be our Secretary DeVos in the Department of Education, the fact that we've gutted our EPA. We've got to get back to where we were and then quickly figure out a fast path toward progress in both. We've lost our leadership on climate change almost immediately when this president took office, and that's something we have to get back to on day one in November. And we have so much progress to make in the way of environment, not just with climate change, but incenting and making sure that we're providing the proper tax credits so that we have clean energy, renewable energy, sustainable buildings in our communities. So one, I think that we can do so much more with the environment, and we should be looking at it as an economic opportunity, not just protecting the planet and our children's future. Education is another one. I think that the federal government can do more in terms of restructuring how we think about our education system, and then also making that investment that we know in early education will decrease the achievement gap over people's lives. I don't need to read another study to know that that investment pays off in dividends over the course of people's lives. And so I really want to see us think more programmatically and more sustainably about how we're going to re-engineer our education system so that everybody is set up for success.
Sure. Okay, when is it appropriate to make use of private sector resources like outsourcing and public-private partnerships for government functions?
Yeah, so I think when you can form public-private partnerships, we should do it. I mean, we don't have industry involved nearly as much in some of the things that we want to accomplish, whether it's, I grew up in Lowell. And so this was a hallmark of the late Senator Paul Tsongas. And he was really good at bringing, private enterprise to the table with state and local government so that, we could bring funding back to a community and use that to leverage private investment. I see that model working in education. I see that model obviously working in job creation. I think about our regional economy a lot and the high-tech companies that we have here, the defense companies that we attract here because of our well-skilled labor force. And I think about the partnership that we can strike with our public universities, with our community colleges, so that we can design programs, design training to get more people into jobs faster without the burden of a 4-year college debt. I mean, I went to Lowell High, so I started my freshman year with 900 incoming freshmen, and I only graduated with 540. So, we've done a lot to improve that rate of dropout over the course of the high school years in Lowell, but it still begs the question, were those 540 graduates of mine, were they all in the pursuit of college, and they're not. And so we do need to figure out how are we going to get all young people into a lane or into a program where they can get a good paying job. And I think industry should be at the table for that.
Sure. What federal government programs have you or members of your extended family benefited from? So I know you've answered a little bit of that. But
Yeah, so my dad is a union iron worker. Today, he's been retired for many years because he has MS. And so my parents, they both rely on Social Security and Medicare. And we have to preserve Social Security and protect it. We have to make sure that the Social Security Trust Fund is solvent. And there are good plans to make it solvent to 2100. We can do that by increasing the cap, the salary cap. We can do that by phasing in the contribution over the course of 25 years. And that's an important program that is not an entitlement. And people pay into that program. And so it's a promise that we make to people when they're working throughout their lives that they're going to have security when they're retired. And we have to make sure that that trust fund is solvent, and we need to fulfill our promise to Americans. So I see those programs as working. My family they're direct beneficiaries of those two programs, and it'll be our job to make sure that they're protected at all costs.
Sure. The next set of questions is about how you obtain and use information. What is a fact to you, and how are facts important in your decision making?
Such a great question. I can't believe we're even talking about the word facts.
Yeah.
And in the fact that they sometimes feel like they're subjective these days. Look, we have to base our decisions on facts, and we know what facts are. They're not, we have scientific rigor around how we come up with our facts. And frankly, we've got processes even with our media where we know there's bias in everything we read. I mean, that's true. And somebody once told me, the only book you'll ever read that doesn't have bias is the phone book. And they're right, and that's fine. I mean, the world would be so uninteresting if we didn't have bias. But we have to have transparency around that bias. We have to know what we're reading so that we understand when we're reading something what the bias is, and so that people can discern for themselves, where the writer is coming from. So, those are things that are an unbelievable disruption right now. That as voters, it's daunting, I think, to have to parse through and figure if what we're reading is based on fact. And I think those rules and those norms are going to change for how we do it. But at the end of the day, we all have publications and we all have go-tos where we trust. We trust that what we're reading is fact, and we have to rely on those sources.
Okay, so here we go. Do you verify information provided to you? And how do you decide what sources of information to trust?
I do. I'm constantly checking. When I don't recognize something that I read or where it comes from, I do my due diligence. I go to that website and I do as much exploring on that website to figure out if this is credible information, or, check out the About Us page, whether it's user-generated content or whether it's coming from, a source I trust. So, yeah, it takes a lot more time, and you do have. There is a burden right now that's placed on us to do that. I think the concern that we all have is that not everyone does that. Not everyone knows to do that. And so we constantly have to shine a spotlight on the fact that news is coming at us from so many different directions and so many different sources, and we, as independent citizens, have an obligation to and a responsibility to check what we're reading.
How do you communicate with people who trust different information sources than you do?
That's funny. You have to get to the root cause analysis sometimes of the disagreement, which, if you ask the right questions, you can diagnose if someone is just very, very passionate based on something that they've read that not to be credible. But I think you have to start by asking questions. I mean, look, you have to respect, people and where they might be getting. I mean, there's so many different channels now, and I think through the course of this campaign, I've learned about many of them. So where did you read that? Where did you see that? Or who told you that? Or because you want, especially in a campaign like this, you want to make sure people have the right information about you, and you also want to make sure that they have the right information in terms of things that are playing out in the media. So, it's you never want to, get in like a never-ending argument. But a lot of times when I know someone is coming at something, or coming at a conversation from a very different source, sometimes I say, I haven't heard that point of view. I'm going to go check it out, or I've never even heard of that source, so I'm going to look into it too. And there's a lot of swapping of phone numbers and emails and follow-up conversations. But yeah, I think sometimes you have to recognize that someone is coming with information that may or may not be true, but you have to have a respectful conversation about it, and I think follow-up, has been important. So yeah, it's a lot of, I think my experience in private business at getting at the root cause analysis and asking diagnostic questions so that you are being respectful while also having the right level of skepticism, maybe, so that you set yourself up later for a better conversation.
Okay. Let's move on to the specific elected position you're running for. Why do you want to be the U.S. Representative for Massachusetts District 3?
So this is my home. I grew up in Lowell. I live in Westford. I've lived here my whole life. Fundamentally, I believe that when Congress is in gridlock and we're not able to make progress, families like the one I grew up in get disproportionately harmed. We rely on the federal government doing its job because so many of us send our children to public schools, or we need to be able to afford our medical bills, and that is at the heart of why I'm running. I've lived here my whole life. I care deeply about my community. I do believe in representative government. I believe that if I'm going to ask you for your vote, I have to understand your community. I have to understand, who you are and the issues that your family confronts, the anxieties that you have at your kitchen table. And so I come from a family that's not unlike many others in this district. And so I know that we need more working class values in Washington. I know that Washington is it's too closely aligned, or too closely on the side sometimes of corporate interests and special interests, and that's the shift that needs to happen. We need to take our government back. We need to have our government working again for hardworking families and seniors. I think this year is pivotal. This is a change election. A new breed of leaders are running for office increasingly across the country. It's absolutely what inspires me to run. It got me off the sidelines. I mean, I look at this administration and all the things I disagree with, and the disruption that's happened in Washington, and I do see it as an opportunity. I really do have optimism that change is going to follow, and I see it every day when I'm knocking on doors and talking to people. They're more engaged than ever, and they're off the sidelines themselves. They're reading up on 10 candidates. It's remarkable. So I do want to be a part of a new breed of leaders with a different set of skills. I've got this deep-rooted experience in the community, but I've also, I understand how Washington works because I've been there. I know I'm going to hit the ground running because I know the legislative process, but I also know this district really well, and I understand business really well. I worked in the innovation economy. I understand how the jobs that we actually attract and retain in this country have changed over the last 25 years. And so I would like to join this new breed of leaders that is not interested in going down and spending the rest of my life there, but rather, questioning the status quo a bit and removing some of those structural impediments to our democracy.
Thank you. All right. And then how long have you lived in the district?
My whole life.
Yes.
I went to Georgetown for 4 years, but the whole time I was, registered and a resident here.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a very diverse district. How do you plan to represent the interests of people with such varying concerns and views of what government can and should do?
Yeah. It is a diverse district. I think that's what makes the campaign so enriching, I guess. I get to meet and have so many diverse conversations. But you're right, Lowell and Lawrence are so different than Concord and Carlisle, and Marlborough is so different than Fitchburg, and everyone's sort of in there, whether it's economic development and they're in the different life stage of their journey in terms of what they're doing to revitalize their community, or the issues that matter to people, whether it's conserving public lands or protecting the environment. I mean, the conversations are diverse, and I think that's what actually gives me, excuse me, confidence to represent this district, because not only have I lived here my whole life, but I got to serve in this congressional office for 10 years. So I was at those town meetings, 20 years ago, and I know how to run a responsive and accessible office, one that is listens, one that tours around the district, gets my butt back to the district, frankly, after the last vote, so that I can work hard in the communities, because I think we're all going to talk about all the things that we're going to do in Washington, and there is so much to do in Washington, and there's going to be such an opportunity for us if the Democrats win the House in November. But if I learned anything from working in a congressional office, it was you really have to stay tethered and attached to the people you're there to represent. And that means working as hard in the district as you do in Washington and coming back. I mean, my family will live in Westford. I've got 2 young girls. They're 8 and 4. They're in school here. And I'll be shopping at the local market basket and talking to the constituents I represent. And that's an important part of the job, is always staying very much attached and attuned to the issues that are confronting the people you're there to serve.
Sure. Okay, I paused. You need some water or something, don't you?
Thank you.
Yeah, can we have some water for Lori?
I have some
water.
water.
You have some water. Okay,
Can I
good.
stop and drink water?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
we'll cut this bit out, because you were starting to get uncomfortable, so I just wanted to make sure you were okay.
You're so thoughtful.
Oh,
Thank
sorry.
you. Most people don't do that.
Oh, okay.
It'll be edited, so whenever you time, just stop.
Well, I gave a little pause, so hopefully that helps you
You
out.
did. I know. Thank you.
I could see you going, what is she doing? But okay.
I'm like, am I supposed to keep talking?
No.
Is she asking me a question right now?
Okay. All right, so I will count to 5. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
I know you heard that frog in my throat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. What concerns do you hear about from voters most often? What are the issues you're most concerned about personally?
There's a huge range of issues. I talk most about how do we close that income inequality gap. So there's 7 working class cities in this district, and so I do talk a lot about jobs, the security of having a good paying job, education, and the affordability and access to good quality education, and certainly healthcare, because we can talk all day long about how great the economy is doing and how we are experiencing the lowest unemployment rate in decades, but not everybody is feeling that progress, and it's because our wages haven't grown and the cost of living has dramatically outpaced what people are earning, and so we really do have to solve that, and we do have a few levers to pull on to close that income inequality gap. But look, this has been a tough year. I'm second generation immigrant. From my grandparents are from Portugal. The immigration debate, it hasn't even been an immigration debate. We've been, the narrative around how we treat and talk about immigrants in this country, how we treat them when they come to our borders, how we treat them in our own communities, has been, it's so disheartening, and it's something we have to change right away. We know that we need comprehensive immigration reform in this country. We've needed it for decades, and that's what we have to do in Congress. We have to solve that, because all of these other, vitriolic conversations that offend so many of us around the wall, around ICE, around those go away when Congress does its job and passes comprehensive immigration reform. Guns. I have so many young people who are coming onto our campaign because of our inaction on gun violence. It's one of the first things that we did after the Parkland shooting, when we heard those young voices, those young surviving voices just make their plea for Congress to act and state legislatures to act. We rolled out our gun paper, and look, no new legislation, research needs to be done here. The Giffords Foundation and the Brady campaign, they've done it all. And we know we have bipartisan agreement on things like background checks. So we need to get to work on that. We need to ban the assault weapons that aren't meant to be in the hands of civilians. We need to have background checks at every point of sale. Look, I think about it just from a very basic standpoint. We need to have research. We don't even commission research by our Centers for Disease Control on the impact of guns on our public health and public safety. And these are things that they should not be partisan. These are not Democrat, Republican. We're not talking about even taking away a Second Amendment right. We're talking about keeping our children safe. And so those are issues that, as a mom, are deeply personal to me. But, going around the district, the opioid crisis, we haven't funded it. We haven't funded treatment. We haven't funded awareness. We haven't put any sort of caps on prescriptions. We haven't held the pharmaceutical companies accountable. And so the breadth of issues is unbelievable in terms of what I hear about, what people fear, what people are just frustrated with around, us not having any movement or progress on. So there's going to be a lot to do, but I do believe that this is going to, there are going to be many, many new people who come down with the mission of getting to work. I know this country actually works best when sensible Republicans are working with sensible Democrats. And we need to get back to a place where we're finding common ground. And look, sometimes it might be that we don't get the home run that we want, but we need a few singles. Like, we need to make progress on some of these issues because they're hurting too many families.
Sure. Please tell us about how you're financing your campaign.
This is probably the thing I'm most proud of because it's hard. Fundraising is hard. It's, let me say it again. It's why good people don't run, because it's soul crushing. It really is. You get in with the best of intentions to put yourself in a position to serve, and you're immediately confronted with the viability of your campaign is based on the money that you can raise. I knew this going in, and so I wasn't surprised by it. But it doesn't change the fact that it's a hard thing to do. We designed our campaign right out of the gate in a way that sort of maps to my values. As someone who was part of the team that passed campaign finance reform, it was very important to me that we focused on our district, right? So the majority of our support is raised from people who live here, people who can vote for me. And that's important. I think there is deep cynicism around money in politics. I know it. I saw it on the House floor. It's the co-location of money in politics is too close. And we have to change that. And that's going to require a huge effort to end Citizens United and to get that big money, those super PACs, corporate contributions out of our democratic process. And the only way I can signal to people that I am in this for them, that I'm going to be working for them, is by not taking corporate PAC money and by funding my campaign with regular people, their contributions, a portion of their paycheck. We're not funded by special interests and lobbyists and from people outside of this district that have no interest here. And so, it's funny, we just had a milestone in our Q2 reports, and I've raised more money from inside this district than all 9 of my competitors combined. And it's something we talk about because, one, we're proud of it. It's the best way that we can signal to people that we're in it for you. We're in it for the people we're there to serve. And I want folks to know that I'm accountable only to them.
Sure. What are your criteria for accepting or declining contributions? You may have answered, but go ahead.
Certainly things happen along a campaign. It hasn't happened to us yet, but obviously you're moving at the speed of light, and so many contributions now come in online or through your social media programs, and but when you're alerted that you've taken a contribution from someone that should not be, doesn't represent your values, or someone who shouldn't be, you don't want to have their influence per se in your campaign, the best thing that you can do is act and return contributions. And I think everyone does that, right? It's even happened in this campaign where it's been alerted by the news media that someone has done, they've been accused of whether it's sexual harassment or impropriety in their fundraising, and those, you do the best you can. You immediately act and you return contributions. And it is, you can't catch everything between when you receive a check and when you deposit it, but you do the best due diligence that you can. I mean, for us, we've got some simple standards. We don't take corporate PAC money, which is, hard for some campaigns to say no to, because those checks can, they can be bigger. And at a time when you're trying to get your message out and raise as much money as you can, they can be tempting. But we've put some policies in place in terms of how we vet the contributions that we, and then frankly, we have a grassroots campaign. We started it back in October. We do a lot of meet and greets. Not everyone gives you a contribution the first time they meet you, but they follow your campaign, and when they're ready and when they've maybe evaluated the rest of the field, they make an investment in your campaign. And I think that's why we've been able to raise so much money from people in this district, not only because of the fact I've lived here, and I have focused mostly on my fundraising efforts in the district, but also we've gotten around even to communities where we don't have deep ties, and we've done those meet and greets so that we could build those conversations, continue those conversations, and now we're getting the support that we need to get our message out. So I think it's just fundamentally how you set up your campaign on day one.
Yeah. National politics is increasingly marked by rancor and division, and dealing with this will be a large part of the job.
Yeah.
Describe a past situation where you had to work to get something done with a group of people who strongly disagreed with your position.
Oh, so I guess the obvious example is when we started campaign finance reform. So Congressman Meehan was the original co-author of the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act of 2002 with Chris Shays, who was a Republican from Connecticut. It often gets referred to as the McCain-Feingold bill because the Senate, they get naming rights. But when we started with that bill, it was vast, right? There was so much that we wanted to regulate, and that wasn't going to be the palatable bill that we landed on that could pass, the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. And so that requires a ton of negotiation. That requires working with outside groups to get co-sponsors and to negotiate a bill that is, that comprehensive and that landmark. And so, of course, there were moments where you were around the table and you didn't agree with any of your collaborators on a whole host of issues, but you had to get to yes on a couple of key things. And so that was, in terms of relevancy of what the job will require down in Washington. I think that is probably a good example of where I've had to collaborate with and really negotiate on terms that would still get at the heart of the money that was the corruptive influence in politics in a way that it was a long process, and it required many people and a team collaborative effort with a cast that couldn't have been more diverse. But you know what? I've got those examples in private practice. I mean, we work. The last couple of years, we've worked with large public companies on how to get more women into leadership roles, and it's not through bad intentions, but there are a lot of antagonistic practices and behaviors in corporate America, as you can imagine. I mean, some I witnessed firsthand, and then others, are unique to whatever company or culture you're working with. And so, I think what you always want to do is you don't want it to ever be a taste great, less filling banter back and forth, right? So we always try to show the data. Let's go and find out where you're losing women in the life cycle. Are you not attracting or hiring women at the same rate you are men? Are you not promoting them? Where is the hot spot? And then go to your root cause analysis around, what are the things, what are the practices that happen there that cause us to not promote or not attract or not hire at the same rate? And then typically, you find a few practices or behaviors they're just dopey, right? But convincing others that they have to change their ways. You have to show them the data, and then you quickly have to show them the pilot or the optimistic path forward, right. Because there's no sense showing folks, the devastating data, if you will, if you haven't thought through how are we going to fix it. And I think that's a way to get people aligned and on board faster.
Cool. What is your philosophy on legislative compromise?
I think it's required. I don't know when compromise became a bad word, but there's, in my experience, I've been relentless on trying to find common ground. Sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it is, and you don't want to stop there. Yeah. But it's, especially in these times, there's, we know that there are large divides, but then we also know that there is support, and I think it's, broad support, bipartisan support. I bring up gun reform as one. I know that the reason why we haven't had a gun debate on the House floor is obviously because of the stranglehold that the NRA has on some members of this Congress, but it's also because of Hassert's rule, which is, a procedure that should not exist in the people's house. I mean, it's there so that we can deliberate and debate the merits of reforming aspects of our government, and to let the Speaker of the House with the stroke of a pen say not today is an affront on our democracy. So I think you only get to those venues to compromise and to find common ground when insidious practices like those are prohibited. But I do think we have to be much more pragmatic, even more so today, about where we can find common ground. Because we do know that there's large public support for some things, and as representatives, it's our duty to find out where we can find compromise. And I'm not so much. I love bold ideas, and I love pushing a bold agenda, and I think we should always have that in our scope around what we're trying to do. And then reverse engineer, how can we get there incrementally? Because sometimes that's what it takes. There will be moments where we can do big, bold change. And I'm hoping, just like everybody else is, that we get those 218 votes in the House in November, and we've got an opportunity to do that. But some of these ideas, I think, we're going to need Republican support for, and we have to get to the table with them, and we have to be, we have to compromise.
Finally, let's touch quickly on some other issues important to our members. Please give a quick response to each issue. A woman's right to choose.
Oh, absolutely.
Health care.
It's a human right.
Civil rights.
I can't believe we're talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you said short answers, so
Yeah,
I want
you
to
can do
respect
one
it.
more,
But not every, it's a shame right now that in the year 2018, we're talking about civil rights, and that some people feel as though that they're not being protected. And I don't care if we're talking about the census, voting rights, an overzealous ICE. I mean, we have to get back to a place where we are protecting the civil rights of everybody who is in this country. When I think about the Supreme Court, I haven't woke up with that pit in my stomach that I had, on the day that Kennedy announced his retirement since November 9th, 2016. And my heart goes out to, gay and lesbian men and women who fear for their rights, women across the country who have already fought the battle and feel like, we're gonna have to fight it again. And then all the progress that we still have to make on, transgender rights. I mean, this is, you come from a community like Lowell with such, diversity. You just grow up, with a feeling of inclusion. And we don't get it perfectly all the time. But because we live in such a diverse community, there is, just inherent respect for everybody that lives in that community. And that is being, it feels like that is under attack right now. And it's not who we are. Those aren't our values. I do think that so much of this election is restoring and protecting those values. That was not the short answer you wanted.
It's okay. We had a little
But
time
it's so
left,
important.
But I understand. Okay.
Thank you.
Net neutrality.
Oh, yes, it's a utility.
Gun regulations.
It's probably the first order of business. There are common sense reforms that we must pass, and if you want, do you want me to name them?
You can. It's completely up to you.
It's absolutely at a basic level. Research, no fly, no buy. I mean, background checks at all points of sale. Instituting the assault weapons ban. We have to keep guns out of the hands of people who are going to harm themselves or others.
Okay. The latest round of tax cuts.
It was not bipartisan. We weren't surprised by what we got. We do need it to be more balanced. Working families are going to suffer as a result of, the 1% getting the biggest benefit, and that needs to be right-sized.
Sure. Government policy for the situation in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I was just at the Puerto Rican Festival yesterday in Lowell, and they're still hurt. I mean, they're hurt by the fact that they were ignored and neglected, and we have to right that wrong, and we also have to signal to them and to every American that we've got each other's back, whether that's in a weather type disaster, or if it's people or whether things are happening in their community that's out of their control. I mean, we are a country that was born on diversity and inclusion, and we are so far away from treating people with those values. And Puerto Rico is, there's a large Puerto Rican community in Lowell, one that I grew up with. I was just there yesterday, and we have to close those wounds.
Sure. Immigration policy.
We have to fight this administration, not just on the narrative that they've chose to set forth in the last 2 years, but we've got to get back to basics here. We have always been a beacon of hope and refuge for the rest of the world, and we owe it to the people who are leaving here to give them a pathway to citizenship.
Sure. Campaign finance reform.
it's a fight I hope to continue in Washington. It's one that I started, and there's no fight that I've started and I haven't finished, so that's part of the reason why I'm running.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks
your
so
coming.
much. I appreciate the question.
So thank you for listening to our interview with Lori Trahan, who's running to replace Representative Niki Tsongas in the House of Representatives. I'm Peggy Wargelin, a member of Concord Citizens Protecting Progress.